So this is my brief background. So, and this would be the outline of my presentation. I'll be moving quite fast because this presentation usually takes 1 hour. And I also saw in the Mentimeter post that many of the topics were already covered in the previous presentation. So whenever we talk about just transition, we start with the sustainable development, which is the nexus of environment, economic, and social developments. And in 1987, this is the generally accepted definition proposed by the Brundtland Commission. So I think all of us know about this. So, but the new norm is no longer sustainability, it's regenerative development. Because humanity consumes the equivalent of 1.7 Earths, so we must not only sustain, we must also restore. We must regenerate. And so the goals and strategies of our organization should take the 17 Sustainable Development Goals into consideration. Most of publicly listed companies, which we also mentor and advise, already taking this as the front and center of their strategies, programs, and initiatives. And why do we need to mitigate climate change? Because arresting global warming is closing very fast. In 2018, the IPCC gave a 12-year limit to arrest irreversible climate change. As of now, we have less than 8 years to avert catastrophic changes. So this is the global warming called Code Red. We need to act now. And the Secretary General Antonio Guerras noted that global heating is affecting every region on Earth, with many of the changes becoming irreversible. So the report firmly placed the blame for global warming squarely on greenhouse gas emission from human activities. And based on recent weather and climate disasters, from this is only from June and August 2021, there's a lot of heat waves, wildfires, and frequent strong storms in North America, and unusual flooding in Europe and China, wildfires in Russia, heavy monsoon rains in the Philippines, and of course the Philippines, in India and in the Philippines, severe drought in Africa and South America. And we could expect more super typhoons like Yolanda to devastate our country, and heavier monsoon rains, as we have experienced last year and this year. So every year, record temperatures are being set, and with the continual increase in temperature, many places on Earth would be uninhabitable. And every 10 years, severe and frequent floodings are happening all over the world at the same time. So these are the trends. If you anyway, you will be given a copy of this presentation, so you can look at this at your leisure. And the average rise in sea level relative to 1900 is reached almost 1 meter. And recently, Quezon City was cited as one of the world cities at high risk for extreme flooding and drought. And Maldives, former President Nasheed said that the sea level rise of over 1.5 meters, hundreds of millions of people will be dead. And he predicted that Maldives would be extinct and swallowed by rising seawater. And this could happen also to many of our coastal communities. So let's start with the moral and social imperative, why we need to arrest climate change. Can we ever forget the tragedies and devastation caused by Yolanda and Ondoy and the super typhoons after that? So look at those pictures. And since 2018, the Philippines is at the top 4 of climate vulnerable countries. Number 20 in 17 and number 2 in 2018. And so from 1999 to 2018, the average ranking of the Philippines is number 4. And in just 7 extreme weather events, 11,000 people were killed and 45 billion were lost. And this is increasing at a higher rate because of the higher intensities of extreme weather events attributable to global warming. And for example, in 2013, the damage caused by Typhoon Haiyan is estimated at 4% of GDP. And according to climatologists and meteorologists, during this TBIG, sea level in the Philippines may be rising faster than the global average 3.7 millimeters per year. So sea level rise is as much as 4 times the global average in some islands in the Visayas. And with coastal areas being submerged underwater, almost 14 million Filipinos would be displaced and need to be relocated to higher locations. So this would mean massive relocations. The next reason is the legal mandate. And if we look at Philippine law, it is replete with laws protecting the environment and utilizing indigenous resources. Let's start with the primary law of the land, the Constitution, and enshrine the right of people to a balanced and healthful ecology. It mandates the full and efficient use of human and natural resources. And IPIRA, which is the primary law governing the energy sector, provides for use of indigenous and new renewable resources to reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels. And moreover, the Energy Regulatory Commission is directed to reduce power rates from all indigenous sources. Question, are the cost of natural gas from Malampaya lower than world market rates? No, it's not. For example, for your information, Malampaya gas is priced in US dollars and indexed to world crude oil prices. As a result, Malampaya price follows world market prices and acts like imported fuel. IPIRA further requires the Philippine Energy Plan to incorporate a preferential bias for environment-friendly indigenous and low-cost sources of energy. So it is a bias for environment-friendly indigenous and low-cost sources of energy. And again, under IPIRA, DOE shall promote development of indigenous and renewable energy sources. And in the DOE, the protection of the environment and conservation of and maintaining ecological balance is reiterated. And to further strengthen the preferential bias for environment-friendly indigenous and local sources of energy, the same provision was repeated in the DOE Act. Remember that this was in the ERC, so it's also in the DOE Act. Then to bolster all of this, the Climate Change Act of 2009 espouses sustainable development as defined by the Brundtland Commission. So the Climate Change Act adopted the objective of the UNFCCC to stabilize GHG concentrations at a level that could prevent interference with the climate system. And in the Paris Agreement, which was adopted by 196 parties on December 12, 2015, for the first time, a binding agreement brought all nations into a common cause to arrest climate change. So in the Paris Agreement, global temperature rise is limited to 1.5 C above pre-industrial levels and ensures assistance from developed countries to developing countries. And based on that, the national intended contribution of the Philippines was 70% emission reduction from 2000 to 2030. But all of these are conditional upon foreign investments. So we submitted our NDC to the UNFCCC on 15 April 2021, and it's slightly better than the NIDC, being 5% higher and not all conditional. But note that the unconditional is less than 3%. So more than 72% is conditional to foreign support. And as head of the Climate Vulnerable Forum in 2015, the Philippines championed the 6 vital provisions in the Paris Agreement. Of course, the limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, enshrining climate justice and human rights, ensuring ecosystems in the preamble, gender equality, human rights, and rights of indigenous people, and promoting comprehensive risk assessment and management, and ensuring grant-based financing for adaptation. So all of these were initiated and championed by the Philippines. Let's go to the RE Act of 2008. This is the law promoting the development of our resources in the country. And the major goals are reduce the country's dependence on imported fossil fuels, and minimize exposure to price fluctuations in the world market, which is happening to the Philippines now. We are dependent on imported fossil fuels, and we are subjected to exposure to price fluctuations in the world market. And in the RE Act of 2008, there were fiscal and non-fiscal incentives provided to increase RE utilization. And the prevention and reduction of GHG gas emission is another goal in the RE Act. So under the non-fiscal incentives, you have the RPS, you have the feed-in tariff, you have net metering, and green energy option. These are the summary of the incentives. These are the fiscal incentives. These are the incentives related to taxes and tariffs. And these are the non-fiscal incentives which contain the feed-in tariff and the RPS, green energy option, as well as incentives and tax rebates for host communities, fiscal assistance programs. And note that the RE Act is one of the most advanced in the world because it incorporates fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. Other countries have only feed-in tariff. We have both feed-in tariff and RPS, and we also have net metering. So the next one, in addition to the RE Act, we have the Energy Efficient Conservation Act of 2018. This is a recent act, and it aims to institutionalize energy efficient conservation as a national way of life to secure energy supply sufficiency and stability. So this means efficient use of RE technologies and systems to ensure optimal energy use is encouraged, but the approach must be market-driven. In addition to all of these laws, we have many others which promote climate change mitigation and adaptation, the Biofuels Act of 2006, the Clean Air Act of 1999, but this needs to be updated to conform to international standard. The Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, most provisions are not being implemented by LGUs and national agencies. That's why even the Supreme Court has to order LGUs to follow the Ecological Solid Management Act provisions. The Water Crisis Act, Mining Act, the National Integrated Protect the Area Systems Act of 1992, protecting mangroves. And what you should ask yourself, given all of these laws in favor of indigenous and renewable energy, was the previous technology neutral policy of DOE according to law? The next thing that we have to look at to build a case on the just energy transition is the economic basis. What are the economic imprimaturs? The Philippines does really have no choice but to go RE. We have very minimal fuel resources. In contrast, we have abundant and practically limitless RE resources. And if you look at the comparative energy data, we are near the bottom in terms of domestic coal and gas supply. 80 in oil production, and I think it's even much lower now because we are practically producing nothing. Gas production, 52nd, again lower because Manampaya is almost depleted. Coal production, 31st, and RE target is 50%, but we are currently around 30%. This was reached a high of more than 40% in the 90s, but we are now down to less than 20%. The big show, I think this was already taken up, but consists RE resources. And again, the vast potential of RE was probably already discussed. So we have more than enough to sustain our development. While the sun shines, while the wind blows, while there is water and plants, while thermal heat remains underground, then we can develop using our indigenous resources. Before the pandemic, the Philippines was one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Without sufficient power, this growth would come to a standstill. By 2040, the country would need almost 44 gigawatts of additional power capacity, according to DOE. Nearly 30% of Filipinos have no access to electricity or experience brownouts according to the Borgian project. And per APEC representative Sergio Dago, 17,000 sitios remain unenergized. And without electricity, the quality of life of rural communities will remain low, with most falling below the poverty line. Rural folks have no choice but to look for better opportunities elsewhere. Urban migration and congested cities will remain as the norm. And the Philippine electricity per capita is among the lowest in Asia. We are third from the bottom, ahead only of Cambodia and Myanmar. And among ASEAN countries, our per capita is less than 10% of Singapore, 15% of Malaysia, 27.5% of Thailand, 49% of Vietnam, and 7% of Indonesia. So we are near the bottom. And despite this low per capita, which is not by choice, it is because we don't have enough supply. For decades, the Philippines has the highest electricity rate in ASEAN. It is even higher than Singapore, especially for commercial and domestic costs. Although electricity costs had admittedly been declining since 2012, our rates are still much higher than second-ranked Thailand. The Philippines is too dependent on imported fossil fuel. It imports 70% of its coal supply in 2019 and probably higher now. Power mix dominated by coal plants and projected to reach 70% or more if all the decommitted plants are built. Note that the DOE moratorium covers only greenfield projects. And coal prices skyrocketed in 2021 and even higher with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So coal prices reached $430 in May 2022, which is the highest historically and bound to increase because we don't know when the Ukraine war will last. In contrast, solar and wind power as well as battery storage, as pointed out in the previous presentation, are declining very fast every year. And if we replace diesel-powered genset, a small iron rich with RE sources, it will save about 10 billion per year in UCME subsidies. So why shift to RE? RE prices are now cheaper than coal and gas. RE prices are stable. Converting diesel gensets to hybrid systems in missionary areas will eventually lead to no more universal charge for missionary electrification that we are all paying in our electric bills. And RE does not emit greenhouse gases. And in all countries, including the Philippines, it's proven that RE creates more jobs. And especially for women. And I think this was also discussed in the last presentation. Coal plants are not reliable, and circulating pressurized beds coal plants exceeded the 32.3 days maximum outage limits imposed by the Energy Regulatory Commission, and the pulverized subcritical coal plants also exceeded the 44.7 days limit mandated by ERC. On the other hand, the so-called intermittent solar plants has outages of less than 3% from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. So you can depend on solar while the sun shines. And likewise, intermittent wind plants is only unavailable less than 2% of the time. So as compared to the more than 30% and more than 40% for coal-fired power plants. The main cause of rotating brownouts are high cost of electricity during peak demand periods due to the unreliability of coal-fired power plants. And despite having less than 3% share of the energy mix, variable renewables reduce spot market prices by 28%. So can you imagine if we have 50% of our energy mix from variable renewable energy resources? Therefore, we must counter the myth that RE is expensive and unreliable. This is totally false. So the way forward for the RE transition has two main pillars: the shift from centralized to distributed generation and flexible generation. Flexible generation will complement the high variability of load demand and power generating technologies. Note that coal power plants are baseload plants, and even the proposed nuclear power plant is baseload. Even something, if we can say, baser load than the coal plant baseload, because you really have to operate it continually, 24/7. And the speed of the energy transition in the Philippines will be driven by a combination of endogenous and exogenous factors. On the left side are indigenous, which are inherent to the country, and on the right side are exogenous, which is outside the control of the country. So in recent actions of DOE and NGCP are favorable towards acceleration of the energy transition in the Philippines. Shift in foreign restrictions to ownership. Geothermal and biomass are open to 100% foreign ownership. Moratorium on greenfield coal-fired power plants. And DOE is seeking to extend incentives to solar and wind. Grid absorption capability and management. The latest transmission development plan sees the interconnection of Visayas to Mindanao finally, and the expansion of key island grid interconnection. And the competitive renewable energy zones and smart grid developments are now part of the transition development plan. So harnessing Earth's resources will achieve the twin goals of energy security and low carbon future. So let's look at the energy trends which will accelerate and allow us the just energy transition. First would be the grid and fuel parity. Grid parity, when retail prices of RE is the same as the grid price. And this was reached as early as 2015 in the Philippines. So the next step is fuel parity, when offers of RE supply of DUs and ECs are the same as the offers from coal plants. This has been attained in 2018 based on offers of less than 3 pesos per kilowatt hour to Meralco. And Western prices average 10 pesos per kilowatt hour and reached as high as 30 pesos per kilowatt hour this year. The approved green energy or grid price ranges from 3.68 for solar to 6.08 per kilowatt hour, are all lower than the coal generation rates of Meralco of 6.18, Beco of 7.87, and Davao Light of 9.08. So if we go renewables, we will definitely reduce our electricity costs. Solar versus coal price. This chart was made way back in 2016, and the experts got it wrong, because solar is actually beating coal all over the world, and likewise in the Philippines for several years now. Solar prices and battery prices are much lower than projection, and as an engineer, I always maintain that technology is boundless while natural resources are finite. So once fuel parity is reached, I think this was also discussed, a problem for power producers is what to do with the oversupply from coal-fired power plants when fuel parity is reached. Who will shoulder the stranded cost from these non-performing assets? Because coal plants have a life of 40 years or more. So if you build these plants now, we will be locked into costly and polluting technologies for several decades. And as I mentioned, the cost of solar is only much lower than fossil fuel plants, even coal plants. And fossil fuel costs are volatile and increase over the long term, as you can see from the new coal indices. And it's reaching a very high cost rates now because of the Russia-Ukraine war. Because of technologies like solar and wind have registered dramatic decline since 2010, and battery costs is showing the same pattern of rapidly decreasing prices. So what we can say is that the future is electrifying, and electricity is the new fuel. And it is now making up 40% of the final consumption of 2040, which is the same share of growth that oil took for the last 25 years. Electric vehicles are also coming very fast. And this is the model of the future, where you have the supply from renewables, and under sector coupling, you can convert this excess supply to synthetic fuel, hydrogen, synthetic gas, and then use it for heating, cooling, and mobility for households, travel, transport, industry, and business. Because of the hydrogen from the using excess power from renewable energy sources can be converted into methane by adding carbon dioxide, and then it can be used as synthetic liquid fuels. And so sector coupling refers to the use of electricity to provide heating, cooling, mobility, and energy for industrial applications in direct or indirect form. So we have a talk about distributed generation as opposed to centralized power. So in distributed generation, we bring supply near demand. And with distributed generation, there will be no more long transmission and distribution lines. And as added benefit, the grid will be more resilient to extreme weather events. Right now, it took months and sometimes even years to restore power after a strong typhoon. And digital communications technology must be tapped to make electricity supply reliable and affordable. This would enable the grid to detect and react swiftly to local changes in usage. I think that the Meralco now is deploying smart meters, and this would help this smart grid and help control better and manage power supply and demand. And we also mentioned energy efficiency, and these are very short payback periods, sometimes less than 2 years. And there are a lot of new products like LEDs, inverter type air cons and refrigerators. Demand side management and integration could cut electricity usage and lead to large savings. This is just a representation, but as I mentioned, electric vehicles are coming very fast. Major European manufacturers like Volkswagen will stop producing and selling combustion engine cars in Europe by 2023. US car makers like GM will likewise stop gasoline and diesel vehicles by 2035. And one advantage of EVs, they can also be utilized to manage power supply and demand by scheduling charging during low demand periods and providing power during peak demand periods. And Internet of Things, I think you heard of this. All devices can be interconnected and controlled remotely. And telecommuting, even before the pandemic, 64 million employees in the US are able to telecommute at least part-time. And under the new normal, because of the pandemic, teleworking or work from home is expected to stay. I think most of us are already doing that. And even after the lifting of the controls of the pandemic, I think many are still will opt to work part-time or full-time from home. And this trend will impact urban planning, transportation, communication, business center, malls, and leisure areas. Let's look at the barriers to implementation. If moral, legal, economic, and future trends all point out to a clean energy future, why is the Philippines lagging behind in the energy transition? There are many barriers to implementation. First, there is the preference to coal plants. There is many people, if you look at the papers, still maintain that we need base load plants to supply power 24/7. And they allege that RE are unreliable and coal plants are more reliable, but we have proven that the opposite is true. And being a mature technology, banks and funders are familiar with coal plants and are more inclined to fund them. And for example, funders and banks are still not funding merchant plants, although the spot market prices are very much higher than the cost of solar and wind, for example. Automatic fuel pass-through. Fuel risk is shouldered by consumers, not the developers, and this makes them attractive to developers because of minimal risk and less complex project development. And When they present to the public, they don't consider fuel, so it always appears that the coal-fired plants have the lowest cost, which is not true. Red tape discourages investors and developers. For example, I was a consultant to several foreign companies, and most of them moved to Vietnam, for example, and even to Myanmar because they can move faster there. They don't have as much red tape. Hopefully, the ease of doing business law and its implementing ARTA will be able to cut red tape and make the bureaucracy more efficient. And we also have the changing priority and rules, which is confusing developers and investors. For example, under the feed-in tariff before, we have the first come, third serve. Then although we have fit under the law, no more pits for solar and wind since 2015. RPS is not yet being implemented. And what is our planning? Is it 30% coal, 30% nat gas, 30% RE, 10% others, which was the planning based in previous administration. Then it became 70% base load, 20% mid-merit, 10% peaking. So technology neutral, nuclear plant revival. So what's next? So we must have a definite plan for the future. And long-term planning does not take into account the current demand and supply scenarios and future trends. For example, installed capacity of coal plants already exceed base load demand by several gigawatts. And yet more coal plants instead of flexible plants are approved for construction. The policy shift from centralized to distributed generation is not yet integrated in the recent PEP, Philippine Energy Plan and Power Development Plan. So there is no well-defined transition plan, despite the many disadvantages of distributed generation, such as more secure and resilient grids against extreme weather events, substantial savings in transmission and distribution capex and losses, lower repair and restoration costs, and faster recoveries after calamities. So considering all of this, what is the way forward? Energy transition must be socially just. No Filipinos should be left behind. There must be fair distribution of costs and benefits among all stakeholders. Right now, even with the pandemic and all of these power shortages, we noted that the power producers have boom profits in 2021. Fair and transparent treatment of investors and effective government oversight. This is the roadmap. Roadmap A, integrated system planning. So reduce dependence on imported fossil fuels. Technological and cost trend must be considered. Remove automatic fuel pass-through, shift to distributed generation. Grid expansion planning with smart grid and microgrids for resilience. Energy access in rural areas. Accelerate hybridization of diesel gensets and install community solar home system managed by electric cooperatives or village cooperatives. And RE development, streamline the permitting process, continue the RE support schemes, level the playing fields, more support to run-of-river hydro, waste to energy, and low enthalpy geothermal, grid integration of BRE. It should not be concentrated in a small area like what happened in Negros. And there must be increased capacity of transmission lines in areas with high wind potential. And even in Luzon right now, there are solar projects which are hampered by interconnection problems. And there must be priority to solar rooftops because solar rooftops will reduce peak demand and lower spot market prices. And energy efficiency and conservation, EEC is known as the first fuel because if you save, then you don't need to produce the power. So we need public campaign on energy conservation, and again, promote solar rooftops for peak demand shaving, and also rooftop gardens to mitigate pollution. The roadmap D, the strict implementation of regulations to decrease pollution because this is not being really done. We must have more monitoring centers. re-engineering conventional generation technologies for practical generation operation, because right now, coal plants, for example, are already operating at low capacity, and because of that, this is causing them to break down. Minimizing the risk of stranded assets and costs from conventional plants, and using carbon tax, fiscal measure, emission trading, and other offsetting mechanisms to influence the power generation mix. So we must implement the polluter pays principles and emission trading. Then the National Electric Power Vision, why the question mark? Because these are moving targets. These targets keep on being delayed, and unless there are commitments from the government agencies and all sectors of society. For example, the competitive selection and retail competition open access, ERC said that they are not bound to reduce the 500 kilowatt ARCOA threshold this year. Reason given was patronized has not been very bullish. So end users need to be enlightened about the advantages of ARCOA. Then full implementation of the EBOS by 2030. Are we really going to hit the 35% share, which will restore the RE share in the energy mix? Are we going to have 100% access to electricity by then? Are we going to attain the 70% GHG reduction? And the target of 50% RE share in the energy by 2040, or how are we getting there? And by 2050, the target of 100% share of RE indigenous sources in the energy mix and zero coal importation. Will that happen? And in order to be able to have a just transition, I have always been pushing for the no regrets power strategy espoused by the Electric Power Research Institute. And the strategy considers the vital elements of resiliency, flexibility, and connectivity. And based on this, the future power system must be self-sufficient, not dependent on imported fuels and technologies, reliable, zero to minimal outages, interruptions, and fluctuations, resilient against extreme weather events and calamities, affordable, everyone has access to electricity within their means, clean, carbon neutral, so as to meet the 1.5 degrees Celsius in global warming by 2050. And how do we get there? We must fully shift to distributed and flexible generation. Capacity planning should be based on residual load, not base load. Residual load is what's left after subtracting the generation of almost zero marginal costs, such as variable renewables like solar, wind, and hydro from demand. Power supply will be dominated by variable renewable energy, so that there will be times when supply exceeds demand. Negative pricing will be utilized to encourage large end users to use the excess demand. Storage technologies will be needed to store excess supply. Sector coupling will harness excess power. Many residences and buildings will generate their own power supply through solar PV. Many of us will be prosumers. Two-way power flow will likely happen during noontime. The use and system operator must manage the power flows to utilize excess power supply. Power to X and sector coupling technologies must be employed to harness the excess supply. Finally, every Filipino will have access to electricity at all times. Nobody will be left behind. According to the IPCC, society's reliance on fossil fuels is the main reason why the planet is already warmed by 1.52 degrees Celsius. Fossil fuel power plants had been identified as a major cause of greenhouse gas emissions. Over 40% energy-related CO2 emissions are due to burning of fossil fuels for electric generation. We are now faced with this extremely serious threat to our survival. We must evolve so as not to become extinct. Similar to health protocols to mitigate COVID-19, we must institute governance protocols to ensure that we are able to prepare for, mitigate, and recover from the impacts of extreme weather events and climate disasters. And we can no longer wait. We must act now. And I always espouse this word of 3 zeros: zero poverty, where everybody has enough to eat; zero unemployment, everybody has a means of livelihood; in discerning a living wage, zero net carbon emissions, reduce emissions of climate-altering carbon to net zero. And let us work together towards Ambition 2040 of clean air, green jobs, clean growth, industrialization, and sustainable development. Thank you very much for your time.